Ulrich Bruckner, a professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin. He joins us from the German capital. Ulrich, always good to speak to you. So what's your assessment of the current European position on this issue and the statements that we've heard just today from EU leaders, Ursula von der Leyen saying Greenland can count on us?
Well, we have practiced dealing with President Trump for more than a year plus the first term, and he's still able to take everyone by surprise. So what you heard from European leaders is that they are totally taken by surprise and unprepared, because of course there is no way to turn this into a military conflict. And then threatening President Trump that this would be the end of NATO is, given that he is such a transactional thinking person, not the worst case scenario one can possibly think about. So there's a lot of confusion. There is no plan B. There's nothing like scenarios in the drawer that could be applied to this. But it also doesn't mean that this is the end of Greenland being part of the Danish kingdom.
How is it that the EU is so unprepared for this? Because it's not as if this is the first time that Trump has spoken about Greenland. Even in his first term, he mentioned he wanted to have more US security there. And in the last few months, he's definitely said a lot more about Greenland. So one would think that the EU would have possibly come up with some sort of plan B, as you call it, because this could impact the relationship between the EU and the US, could it not?
Of course, it massively affects the relationship. But if someone would have asked you a year ago if you could possibly imagine that a NATO country is invading a territory of another NATO member, you would think that the person is nuts. So you are not preparing for something that is so highly unlikely, given the fact that the whole idea of collective security is built on a commitment of all the NATO members to protect each other and not attack each other. And an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. So technically, the United States would be asked for help if there is something like an invasion going on, which makes no sense at all. But what we see is, on the one hand, a military explanation, and there's nothing wrong with looking at the geostrategic importance of Greenland. And Denmark signed in 1951 an agreement with the United States to make sure that this part of NATO territory is protected also by American forces that can establish air bases or whatever it needs to guarantee the security of NATO space. The other thing is exploiting raw materials. And this points in a direction which is a total no-go, that a country or an autonomous part of Denmark that has suffered so much under colonial oppression would now be conquered by a post-colonial power under President Trump, who acts like a king. This, I guess, goes even beyond what the Congress would ever allow him.
And once again, I feel I have to use the word unprecedented, which we've probably used that word to describe global events in the past year more so than at any other time in the last few years. But is there not another workaround here when it comes to NATO? Because they have said they will increase security around the Arctic. This is what Donald Trump says his greatest concern is, the buildup of Russian and Chinese ships there. So is that not enough, though, to satisfy him in that sense, that if NATO does get more involved, because we've seen European countries up their NATO budget, their defense budgets over the past year, surely there has to be another way than the United States buying Greenland, rather, or invading it?
Well, someone who's not a politician, not a diplomat, but a deal maker who thinks in transactional terms will always present something as the rationale is increasing security, but what he actually wants is benefits for his family, for his buddies, and as a side effect, making America great again, exploiting raw materials and resources of a territory that doesn't belong to the United States. This is his main driver. If it would all be about security, he could come tomorrow. There have been many more air bases and military installations during the Cold War than currently exist, and Denmark and the Greenlanders would be happy to feel more secure in whatever changing geopolitical environment. This is without question. But taking the territory and exploiting the resources is a completely different picture.
Professor Bruckner, good to get your take live there from Berlin. Thank you very much.